Hello, my name is Jim Gamble. I'm the Chief Executive of the Unique Group of companies which incorporates safe and secure schools and colleges and how to be safer online. I was the founding Chief Executive of the Child Exploitation and Online Protection Centre, and I'm also currently the independent chair of the City and Hackney Safeguarding Children Board. For the next 40 odd minutes, I'm going to talk to you about safeguarding in a digital age. But before going there, let's just go back to the City and Hackney for a moment, and not just so that I can brag about the fact that we are the first board ever in the UK to be judged outstanding by Ofsted, but so that I can reflect on why I think that is. We're outstanding not because of people like me. We're outstanding because we were able to demonstrate through our partnership the impact that we were having on young people's lives. And impact is key. We were able to demonstrate that impact for a couple of reasons. The first is because of the people on our team. Rory McCallum, the Senior Professional Advisor, a critical individual and critical component. So having the right people around you is really key. The critical issue, however, is being fundamentally and unashamedly child-focused. We are child-centric in everything we do. We consider how it impacts on the life of a child. And that's really the most important issue. What I've learned in the police, in CEOP, and in the other roles that I've had in the safeguarding environment is this. You've got to deliver your service, you've got to deliver the help and support that you do within the context and in the context of a child's life. Whether at home, whether at school, whether in health, whether amongst their friends, but importantly in this day and age, within the context of how their life and the vulnerabilities they may have at different times are reflected in their digital footprint. Many children grow up in healthy, happy homes. They're given lots of opportunities in life. They feel safe. They have good friendships. But even those children at times will feel vulnerable. They may feel isolated. Other children aren't so fortunate. They'll grow up in environments where neglect is key. They'll grow up in environments where emotional abuse, physical abuse, and sexual abuse will imprint a terrible memory and a terrible legacy on their lives. Understanding that context and how it can isolate children and make them vulnerable is really important. I think the best charity in the UK, if not in the world, is Childline. They provide a route whereby children at the time they need help can get it either online or offline, on the telephone, via email, or in an internet relay chat room. And if you look at the statistics just published by the NSPCC within the last month, those key up-to-date statistics about why children phone Childline for help, you'll find out that number one or number two over the last number of years has consistently been about children being unhappy at home. It's been about esteem issues. All of those issues around the context of their lives reflect in the vulnerability that can make them more susceptible to harm. Now, you're probably thinking he was going to talk about safeguarding in the digital world and we haven't mentioned technology yet. And actually, I'm not going to mention technology for a little while. What I am going to reflect on, first of all, is the likes of the Marshall Report. So we've learned lessons from Rotherham. Do any of you watching this think that where you are is really that different? Do any of you think that go back, 10, 15 or 20 years, that people didn't view young people in an inappropriate way, that we didn't make the mistakes that we were brought up to make, that we viewed some people as actually overly sexualized or promiscuous when we should have identified them as victims? So I'm not trying to stigmatize or lay blame at Rotherham's door. I think the errors that were made there can be seen everywhere. Professor Jay's report has been read by many of you, I'm sure. I wonder how many of you have read the Marshall Report. Professor Kathleen Marshall came to Northern Ireland. She looked at some of the issues we have when it comes to children who are vulnerable to and suffer from child sexual exploitation. Unlike Birmingham and other parts of the UK, we don't have as diverse a community. So one of the things that when Marshall looked at Northern Ireland I thought was interesting was how she would reflect the harm, because it's not gangs of Asian men or any other type of group. It's about Indigenous men. It's about men and sometimes women who will expose the children who live and operate in their proximity. It's about the risk that they create. So the Marshall Review, if you haven't read it, it's really important, I think, because it looks at some of the underlying vulnerabilities that children have in home, where substance abuse is something that is occurring on a frequent basis, and where the adults around them perhaps have mental health issues, where the child has self-esteem issues, or a child is isolated, or even down to a child who's suffering from a recent bereavement, all of these things create an enhanced level of vulnerability. So do you understand the moderate risk indicators when a child begins to stay out? When you get these phone calls that become concerning because they're secretive, their online behaviour changes, the mobile phone that's always beside them face up so they can tell with a glance whether they've had a message is now face down. When it buzzes, they're leaving the room, and you see that sign of vulnerability and anxiety in their behaviour. If one of their peers, if one of their siblings has been the victim of exploitation, that may well be an indicator that they too are vulnerable. Children suffer from despair. You can see a change in demeanour. That's why when you deliver training, whether it's to safeguarding professionals in isolation or to those safeguarding professionals in the education arena, to teachers, you need the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, you need the caretaker there, you need the lollipop man or the lollipop lady, because they'll engage children in a different way. They will see them and judge their demeanour in a way that perhaps is hidden in the classroom. Marshall talks in her report about significant risk factors, and most of you will be well aware of what those are. Inappropriate relationships with adults, physical or emotional abuse that you know they've suffered from, the child that has the unexplained gifts or more money than you'd expect them to have, and they won't explain or can't explain how they get it. Children who are hanging out with people you know represent a risk, whether you're in the police, whether you're in children's social care. Those individuals who are always present when children are much more vulnerable. So understanding that is important. But here's the key. All of those risks, all of those harms will actually be reflected at some point in a child's digital footprint. That's why it's important. That's why it's critically important that we understand that digital footprint, and that when we engage with a child who we think may be in trouble, who we think may have a range of complexities in their life that make them vulnerable, that we don't ignore the social media. We don't see it as something novel and distinct. We see it as something that's integrated into children and young people's lives. That's why context is key. And if you're engaging in safeguarding, and you're looking at child sexual exploitation, you're looking at bullying and harassment, you're looking at issues around self-generated images, you need to think about the basics. What social media is that child using? Now, we're going to show you a glimpse of a range of social media icons, and I wonder how many you can identify. I wonder how many you actually use. How many of those social media platforms have you visited? Do you know which ones children use today? And more importantly, if you're a teacher, do you know the 4 most popular used by children in your class? That's important. The one thing you must never do is this: hide behind the badge of I don't do social media. It's up to you whether you do social media or not. If you do, it's up to you whether or not you make a fool of yourself by the things that you say. But if you're going to be a safeguarding professional, if you're going to make it your business to make sure that children are safe, then you have to do social media. You need to download Snapchat so that you understand it. You need to have Google Alerts on so that you understand what Yellow is, the app Yellow, and what that means regarding the risk that might manifest itself for children and young people using Snapchat. You need to understand the apps that are most popular, the Instagrams, the Facebooks, the Twitters, and the other. Because if you don't, you'll not know the difference between someone having eaten something they don't like or there being a problem in their social media platform if you hear children talking about a problem with a feed. You need to keep up to date, and you need to stay up to date. That doesn't mean you need to be an expert in all things, but you need to get online, you need to be online, and you need to develop a contemporary and credible understanding of those mechanisms that are there. So the first question to ask yourself is, does my organisation have a safeguarding strategy? Do we have an e-safety policy? If you do, that would have been great about 5 years ago. But in the world I'm talking to you about, it's not really relevant. If you do have one, and I've had schools say we've got a 300-page policy. Well, that's great if you ever want to, keep the leg of the bed level or hold the door open. But the bottom line is, if it's not easy to access and simple to understand, if it's not used by people, then it's no use. If it is an e-safety strategy, it's much more likely to focus on technology and not behaviour. So whilst I've said to you, you need to get online and be online, that's so that you understand the behaviours in those spaces, where to go and what to do when something goes wrong. E-safety strategies, e-safety and internet policies, throw them in the bin. You need to begin developing something different. And my suggestion is that you follow the lead that we've delivered in Hackney and that we've delivered for a range of our clients across the country, and that is develop a safeguarding in the context of young people's access to technology and use of social media strategy. You can't separate these things out. You can't treat the internet as something separate and distinct anymore. If you do, you miss that thing which joins up all of the behaviours and reflects all of the opportunities and risks. Children like to be liked. More importantly, they like to be seen to be liked, and that creates lots of vulnerability in the context of the online world. Bullying and harassment is a key issue. None of you who are engaging frequently and routinely with children won't have been exposed to the child who's perhaps bullied at home, bullied in the street, bullied in the class, who is also revisiting environments online because of their childish curiosity to see what people are saying, and that bullying manifests itself in those spaces. Childline, the most calls they received from the youngest group was about bullying. Children as young as 6 last year got on the phone to Childline to talk about how bullying made them feel. Bullying is about being different. It's about being a different size, a different shape, perhaps where you worship or faith. Bullying is all about being different. Disturbingly, we know that children with special education needs are 16% more likely to be persistently bullied online. We need to know that, we need to understand it. And NASEM, the National Association for Special Education Needs, has just produced some great work on the perfect victim. Those children who are struggling with lots of challenges, who become yet more vulnerable sometimes in the online environment. Very often children, without meaning to, manifestly create a risk themselves because they'll be literal in their approach to friendship requests online. I want to be your friend, and they think that's a good thing. You need to understand it. You need to understand the environment. You need to understand the context of that child's life and the challenges that they face, so that you can equip them with the skills to engage in an environment where they can be safe and benefit from the huge opportunities that are there. We know from recent studies coming out of the United States that adolescents, young people with difficult backgrounds and problem behaviours, are much more likely to have thought of self-harming or killing themselves. So bullying isn't something about child's play. Bullying very often becomes criminal harassment. And whilst no one wants to criminalise children, there's a time and a place for people to learn that there's a consequence if you use the anonymity that the internet can provide to hurt another child. So as a safeguarding professional, you need to understand that. When we work with schools, with other safeguarding bodies, with those involved in LAC, looked after children, we talk about a mnemonic SOS. A child's attitude towards school, the things you'll observe in that child's behaviour, in that child's demeanour, and the things a child will say. And working through that mnemonic and building on it, you're able to equip people with a range of experiences and a sense that they know that a child who's suddenly changing how they travel to school or not wanting to go to school, a child who's turning their phone upside down, a child whose behaviour changes when it buzzes and they get a message, a child who begins to speak disparagingly of themselves, they're triggering that type of behaviour. Very often in the school environment, that can be about things that are being mirrored in Instagram, in Facebook, and in other very, very popular social media profiles. When that happens, there's no such thing as a secret in school. Lots of people will hear, do you know where to go and what to do when that happens? Are you clear on the help and support that's available to you? If you're not, you need to start finding out now. You need to talk to the designated teacher. You need to talk to your gateway team, your MASH team, your first response or fast response team. The time to ascertain where to go and to whom for what type of help isn't in the middle of a crisis when a child needs you most. You need to be clear about what the options are, and you need to be clear about those harms so that in the classroom, at the right time, in the right place, in the group of children you're working with, or the child in difficult circumstances that you're engaging one-to-one, that you're able to reflect the harm that they might cause to others by behaving in a particular way. And I'll come back to that in a minute. You can't operate in today's world without having an understanding about gaming. Gaming is key. Professor Andy Pippin has done fabulous work across the UK. So we understand that the 18+ game that gets brought into the house isn't brought in by a predator. It's brought in sometimes by mum, but most often by dad. Because he brings it in and he gives the game, Grand Theft Auto, to the child who sits and watches it. And maybe you think, well, my child can handle that. Maybe people who talk to you say, well, no, my child only plays that, but I don't let them play with others. We don't enable Wi-Fi, so they're just playing it by themselves. But some of these games encourage an approach to sexism, glorify the use of violence and criminal activity. So you need to think and reflect about how that happens. In Professor Andy Pippin's study, I've seen responses from young children, 9-year-olds and 7-year-olds, one of whom actually reflected that he wanted Grand Theft Auto for Christmas, but only to play with the cars, not the hookers. Another child talked about the fact that they wanted to play the game because they could rape people. I've done work recently with the National Health Trust. We went in on consultancy to look at how they were doing what they were doing regarding safeguarding. And when you engaged the community midwifery team, they knew what to look for in the house if it was lying open in a magazine, but not what to consider if they walked past children who were online gaming with a game like Grand Theft Auto. We got to begin looking at the context of children's lives in a very different way. And those children who are gaming, who go online, who play those games where they can get multiple friends from across the world, then there's an educational experience to be had, but the risk and the dangers are magnified. Lauren Lefave, Breck Bednar's mother, has been very active campaigning over the last year and a bit since the death of Brett in a situation where he was engaged and he was groomed, where his parent was pushed back, till ultimately we all know about the tragic consequences. One of the problems there is this: too few safeguarding professionals knew who to signpost her to. Too often the police can let people down. And I say that, having been a police officer, I'm proud to have been one for 30 years. We've got to begin reflecting on this new environment. We can't treat it as virtual. We know that the harsh reality is that young people are being trapped. They're being groomed, they're being exploited, they're exposing themselves to risk and others represent a risk to them. So you might be the frontline individual who engages them. Simply telling them to phone the police often won't work. Demanding that they receive the service and the protection that they need is key. The multi-agency environment is critically important, and it's not about us all being friends. It's good to have that mutual respect, but it's got to be about demanding the right service at the right time in a child's life. That's what it's about. It's not about a popularity contest. So think whenever you engage with a child who is demonstrating or exposing themselves to unhelpful or harmful sexual behaviour. And when you do engage partners, make sure, if necessary, you bang the table and demand that they get the help and support that they should, and that that organisation doesn't pass it off, for example, to the high-tech crime unit. These crimes are real crimes involving real children. So understand gaming, and understand actually that some of the games that are most dangerous can be those that have no content that you'd ever worry about. Sporting activities. Once that child is able to go on voice over IP, engage with another person where they have a mutual interest because they're playing football together online, they begin to develop rapport, and rapport creates friendship. Friendship means you can have my Facebook, or you can be my Facebook friend, you can have my Snapchat handle, you can get onto my Kik. All of those things make children more vulnerable if they don't really know the person they're talking to. Children use a different language today, and when they're online they'll use the abbreviations. In the old days when CEOP was first created, it was POS, parent over shoulder. But can you identify what this sign means? This sign is an open invitation for sex. Did you know that? The bottom line is this: you need to make it your business to find these things out. You need to make it your business to stay up to date, because you are in the front line of child protection. When we think about risk online to children, we tend to think about the big names, the Facebooks, the Instagrams, the Snapchats. And of course, we should think of those. But if you look at the top 5, sites that represent the greatest risk, you're not going to find them there. Facebook has come on leaps and bounds over the last 7 to 10 years. Their level of moderation, the way they've constructed and built their site. And let me say this, representing a company who builds apps for schools, representing a company that builds technology to help make people safer, Facebook are at the cutting edge of that. How many of you have heard of Omegle Talk to Strangers? Those sites where a child goes on because it sounds risque. Those sites where a child will engage because actually it seems like fun. And those sites where a child will get to talk to a stranger within 35, 45 or 50 seconds. And the stranger very often will simply have a deviant sexual intent as they engage them. Do you understand how that works? Have you ever visited that site? Are you in a position to know which apps they're likely to push children towards? Because none of the apps that I've talked about are built to hurt children. They're all built to create an environment where children and young people and others will go so that they can become a profitable business. And that business is driven by click-through advertising. So let's think about where we are when we are and think about those environments that children engage in. Make it your business to find out what the top 5 sites are. Earlier this year, the NSPCC, in conjunction with O2, created a list where you would be able to find out what the top 5 places were where children are going to be exposed to inappropriate material. We can't talk about safeguarding in the context of a digital world without reflecting on sexting. Bullying and sexting sometimes are part of a vicious cycle in school. Self-generated content. It's bad enough that the predator will go online and masquerade. It's bad enough that the predator will go online and search through a range of conversations. I thought the acronym ASL was dead and gone with Microsoft Instant Messenger, but it's back with a vengeance. So they'll search out a child on the basis of their age, their sex, their location, and they'll engage them in a conversation. They might try and lure them from the digital world, from the virtual world to the real world where they can physically abuse them, or they might try and incite them actually to expose themselves online. That virtual abuse that will never go away, planting that seed of worry about when will that image ever come back again. Sexting is made yet more complex because children and young people will generate images themselves. So as a 15-year-old boy or girl in school, I may willingly share an image with my 15 or 16-year-old boyfriend or girlfriend. I break the law if I do that. So there's one thing, the law needs to change. That's an error of judgment, not a criminal offence. So when I'm in my bedroom, panic-stricken, because I've shared that picture as a 15-year-old girl with my 16-year-old boyfriend, I dropped him last week, and now he's showing those images to others. When I'm in that state of abject panic, when my heart is in my throat, when tears are in my eyes, when I cannot think, the last thing I want if I search Google for help is to find out I've committed a criminal offence. Is that going to encourage me to come forward? Of course it isn't. And every one of you involved in criminal justice, involved in children's social care, involved in any safeguarding activity, you need to pause and reflect, and every opportunity you get to say this is wrong, you need to say it. Because the child is in a position now where they feel the stigma with which they will be painted is irreversible. And part of that is because people go into schools to deliver messages about deterrent. If you're engaging with a child or young person, you might tell them, look, if you do this, you break the law. If you put an image of yourself online, once it's online, it stays online, and you can never get it back. By completing those 2 sentences, you've just removed the one thing that might save that child from self-harm or suicide: hope. The world we're in today is very different. Sometimes as adults we need to think and reflect on those things that we did when we were younger, the mistakes that we made. The fact of the matter is this: what goes online doesn't always stay online, especially if you can intervene early. If you can identify who's had the image, who's shared the image, how and where they've done that. In order that we can encourage children to participate in making themselves safer once they've made a mistake, in mitigating the harm, we have to deliver messages that say this: everyone will be on your side. The police will be on your side. The teachers will be on your side. Mum and dad or your carer, your foster carer, we will all be on your side. You know why? Because we understand we have made mistakes in the past ourselves. But if you have made a mistake and shared an image, actually, the sooner that can be fixed is based on how quickly you come forward. No matter what you do in life, you may make a mistake. We all have. But the best way to deal with it is to come forward to that adult you trust as soon as is possible. So until we change the law, until we begin dealing with this in a more effective way, those are the messages that I recommend you deliver when talking to young people about images. Young people deal in this environment on a frequent and routine basis. How can we change their behaviours? I've learned a lot of lessons over the years, and I think this: when you have children in school, you have a captive audience. What you need to do is use that education environment, use the club that you're involved in, and build a partnership between the parent and carer and the school via the child. So the time to strike is when it's contemporary and credible in the child's mind. So if something has just happened, has just been in the news, is on the feed of their social media, talking about a child exposed to particular risk or something terrible that happened, that's the time to engage them in the classroom. That's the time for them to do the work together. And not about internet safety in isolation, but actually about being a good friend. So for us, when we engaged with the schools we work with, in the aftermath of the Ask FM issues, where a number of children who had very complicated lives offline ended up engaging in Ask FM prior to committing suicide, we began to deal in workshops in schools saying, how would we feel if that had been one of us, if that had been one of our friends? And focus on the power of friendship. How can we make children safer? How can we help them help their friends when they're in trouble? And then push the homework or the project work out of the school back home to the parent or carer. So the comprehension is simply 2 paragraphs about what happened, why it happened, how you could prevent that, and who would you go to talk to? Who would you recommend that a friend went to talk to in a situation like that? Headlines to homework is a philosophy that actually works. It's moving away from simply talking about the dangers as some distant, unrelated thing, to the style we use when we deliver cycling proficiency training in school. That's about kids learning to be safe on the back of other people's experiences. The apps that we create for schools build those partnerships. And if you have one of those apps, or you're in one of the schools that we're working with, you know that the right information about decoy apps, about sexting, about bullying, about a myriad of things that impact on a child's life are only your reach away. They're in your back pocket. With one click, you'll be able to get advice. In fact, when things change, you need to use technology to push the advice, to push the information into parents' pockets, into teachers' pockets, and into children's pockets. Too often, we've become so seduced by the technology, we think it's such a labyrinth. We can't understand it. And that seduction is really dangerous when you look at policing, when you look at education, when you look at health. Because when we look at the username of the anonymous or the icon that's used, we see it as something to do with technology. I've seen bullying take place in environments like Yik Yak, anonymous environments. And I've engaged with young people who tell me that the police told them there was nothing they could do about it. Well, you know what? Each one of those icons where the conversation is engaged is actually a person. And if we were to strip away the technology, we wouldn't call them icons or usernames. We would actually refer to them as people, and the police would refer to them as witnesses. And here's the thing. In my experience, with all that goes wrong, most people are inherently good. So imagine the environment where people are bullying the child, where outrageous things are happening, and you go in and say, look, here is a contact, an email contact. If you know who this person is, please email this address, and we, the police, will deal with it. Do you know what happens when we've experimented with that? People disappear and the conversation stops, and some people are in a position to tell you who did what and when. And I'm not just saying that because it suits. We've actually done it. We've been contacted by one of our clients at university in a scenario where a young person was being brutally bullied online, where others had said it can't be done. Actually, This is a heavily forensic environment. People who go on don't just operate in one social media platform, they operate across a range and they can be found. So we've talked a lot, or I've talked a lot, about children and young people and technology and the need to look at their lives in context. Too often the predator, lives in a world where everything is on their side, where they actually have no fear of consequence. And there are too many messages today being driven by people in positions of authority, from the police right the way across the safeguarding community, that says there's just too many. Recently we heard from one of the chief constables, Simon Bailey. He's got responsibility in this area and he's doing some good work. But when he says there could be as many as 100,000 online downloading indecent images of children right now, then that's good that we recognise it. But the next sentence should be a demand for greater resources, for better training, so that we're more effectively equipped to hunt down these individuals and hold them to account. When the next line is that perhaps they need to get therapy, then that becomes a concern. And I'm not saying that those individuals who have a deviant sexual interest in children shouldn't seek help rather than hurt children. Of course they should. But for those who've already committed a crime, then they need to be engaged by the criminal justice system. So we need to get the balance right, and we shouldn't allow rhetoric to make us give in. We shouldn't allow rhetoric to make us surrender. We need to fight back. We need to create a citizens' army, a safeguarding army of every decent human being who wants to make children safer online. We've got to collaborate. We've got to educate and empower teachers, educate and empower police officers on the ground, so that it's not about the child being lucky or the parents being lucky when they engage children in social care, or the police or someone else for that matter, that they're lucky that that person understands it and doesn't say, I'll get the high-tech crime unit to get in touch with you in a couple of days. It's your business to be good at this business. So don't just stop with this podcast. I know that I don't know everything, but what I do know is this: too often we abdicate too early. Too often people look at the excuse to give up and give in because it's complex and complicated, and we just cannot do that. So use every opportunity you have. I'll say this: there are lots of tools out there you can use. There's lots of tools out there you can create. We developed SNAP, Safer Social Networking Activity Packs, which we use in our masterclasses across the UK. 5 times a month in different regions, we get safeguarding professionals together. Sometimes we get children themselves together in the classroom and they play a game of cards. It allows them to explore in a safe environment some of the issues about geolocation, some of the issues around friendship, the issues around privacy settings and safety, the issues based and built on real case studies. Some of the greatest success we've had in the use of these cards has actually been when professionals have taken their box of cards with them and engaged that child at 13 or 12 or 11 or 15 who's going through a difficult time, and when the social worker is engaging them, it's very hard to get them to talk. But by saying to them, well, look, we use this box of cards ourselves, you probably know more about these things than we do, and getting them to look at the different cards, the cover photo, the profile picture, the relationship between the news feed and other issues. That child begins to open up and talk, and the feedback we've had in that regard is outstanding. So introducing a practical element where the child can demonstrate their knowledge, that will enable you to identify risks with them, to discuss mitigation strategies. Is the cover photograph always public? So what do you do to protect yourself? How do you choose your cover photograph then? Making sure that they understand about previewing tags so they can control the content within. And actually the importance of only making real friends. And once you have a real friend who you actually know, being a good friend. So you're able to discuss mitigation and you're able to look at a safer strategy in future. What I'd recommend you all do if you work with children is to create digital footprint surveys. Talk to them, print it out on paper, get them to write down all of the devices at home they have through which they're able to go online. Then identify, where does mum or dad or their carer go? 80% of the mums we engage use Pinterest. Where are they going online and spending their time? Then identify where their brothers and their sisters go and where they go. By doing that, you'll identify the 4 most popular apps that they're using. So as part of your work, you'll want to make sure they know how to block, mute and report on those most popular apps they use. By doing that, you'll make a real difference. You can create safety setting audits. We do that. Simple audits that look at these are the best safety settings, for example, on Facebook, on Snapchat, on any of the other platforms or devices. Have you got them? And they simply go through and they tick the ones they have and they rationalize why they haven't got the ones you think they should have. Each of these activities, I would recommend you get the parent or carer to sign when they've been completed at home, so that at a later date, when sometimes parents abdicate their responsibility and say, well, I didn't know this, you can point to the fact that they did. This must be a partnership between the parent and carer, between the safeguarding community and the child if it's to work effectively. The biggest problem that I see, it's a problem that I've always seen, but I think it's getting worse, is this: where to go to for help. To whom do you report what? And in the 2,500 engagements we had last year with safeguarding professionals using this pack of cards, we run a reporting exercise where 18 cards are laid on the table face down, and they, on the basis of the risks they've identified in the game they've just played, have to choose one to go to. And you know what? In so many cases, they choose the wrong one. In so many cases, they have no idea where to go. And actually, there's lots of learning comes from that. So you need to consider, in this environment, which is so often confused and congested, so many people doing similar things, so often actually unhelpfully competitive, you need to think, in the cold light of day, in the comfort of a classroom, in the safety of a homework, or within the group of children that you're working with, or in your own working environment, where would I go around a sexed image? Where would I go around a case of moderate bullying? Where would I go about severe bullying? Where would I go when I know a child has put a picture on Instagram? How would I make sure that the complaint I made is taken seriously if in the first instance that image isn't taken down? And beware of this. Any fool can stand up with a good PowerPoint behind them, and too often they do. Too many people go into schools with the wrong message. The best intent, but the wrong message. If that person isn't credible and contemporary, if they're not up to date, don't let them engage with you in children's social care. Don't let them engage with your children in school. Make sure that you take the time at least to shop for the right support and the right resource. In today's world, use technology to your advantage. Get online, identify the good courses and use them. Identify the good courses and use them. Look at the City of London. They wanted an outreach program where they were going to be able to educate and empower people so that they better understood private fostering. They did that by creating an app. You can download that app today. You know why? Because it's free. So you'll understand what private fostering is. You'll understand what to do and when to do it if you come across that. You need to understand how you can make children safer in sport. And there's apps that can do that. The Irish Sports Council have created an app simply to make children safer in sport. Safeguarding boards, safeguarding partnerships, who knows what's going to happen with them in the aftermath of the Wood Review. As the Safeguarding Children and Social Work Bill goes through. But innovation is key. No matter what happens in the future, be that board, be that safeguarding partnership, be that multi-agency team who's using technology positively. And if you want to see a good example of that, look to Northern Ireland. The Safeguarding Board for Northern Ireland have developed an app that provides information to their social workers, to their professionals involved in health, to the professionals involved in education, and to the entire cast of the safeguarding community in Northern Ireland. Part of it is public facing, part of it is professional facing, but it delivers the right information at the right time to the right person when they're in a place where they can make a difference to a child's life. Grasp the opportunity that technology delivers. There are a whole range of organisations out there. We build apps, others do. The Virtual College deliver training online. Many other people do. See up on the NSPCC. There's no excuse not to better educate and empower yourself so that you're much more effective when it comes to identifying and mitigating risk and actually to making sure that a child gets the help they need when and where they need it. Thank you very much. I hope I haven't ranted too much. For those of you who know me, you probably think that I have, but you expected it before you came. And for those of you who don't, I look forward to engaging with you in person at some stage, perhaps on one of our courses that we run throughout the country, our Safeguarding in a Digital World Masterclass, perhaps through the products that we create for the facilitative learning that we try and engage with in schools with children, or through some of the apps that we're currently building. Thank you.